Hi, my name is Nathaniel Fawson and I am an archaeologist. I have been for about 10 years now, and this channel is devoted to the archaeology of North America, in particular the region that we call the Eastern Woodlands. Now, I've been kind of wanting to make this video for a long time. Longtime viewers of this channel will be familiar with what I've called the transatlantic copper conspiracy, which is the idea that at some point in prehistory, during the Bronze Age, some group of people from presumably the Mediterranean came to North America up to the Great Lakes region, in particular around Lake Superior, and mined out large quantities of native copper that was then transported back to the Mediterranean and fueled the Bronze Age. This is some of my favorite archaeological nonsense. The ideas associated with this are really interesting, and I've actually learned more about this conspiracy through the comments section on the video I did about this. It came out, I think, around 2 years ago, and it has consistently been one of my most viewed videos on a weekly basis. From some of those comments, I was assured that an individual by the name of Scott Wolter had conducted an analysis of copper from the Mediterranean and from the Great Lakes and found that they matched chemically, and this was proof positive that this transatlantic copper exchange did in fact happen. This was interesting to me, so I looked up what they were talking about, and this is coming from an episode of a TV series called America Unearthed, which is honestly one of the most deceitful series I have ever watched on archaeology, because it utilizes a sleight of hand application of hard science in order to make its claims. So it's been probably about a year since I first watched this, but I am going to subject myself to a reaction of this episode again. But since I have already seen it and have already done a lot of background research on it, I am not even going to pretend to be keeping an open mind about this. There is a vast chasm of difference between keeping an open mind and swallowing any pill of horse shit that is thrown in front of you uncritically. This is absolute nonsense. So, without too much further ado, I am going to pour myself a glass of whiskey, and I am going to watch this garbage one more time. For those of you in my comments who are saying, oh, you should really take a more professional and academic tone in this, it'll make you more, I don't know, like, credible or something. It's my channel and I will use whatever tone I want to. When it's your channel, you can maintain an academic tone, but this stuff is fucking stupid and I'm going to take the tone that I want. Thank you. So, let's get after it.
I'm heading to Isle Royal in Lake Superior. Here in the Great Lakes region, more than a century ago, an incredible relic was found. A tablet with cryptic symbols. Symbols, I think, are the key to unlocking an epic, unsolved geologic mystery. This area was once home to some of the largest copper deposits in the world.
Still is.
Billions of pounds of copper lay hidden underground, and someone knew that. At some point prior to Columbus coming to America, much of the Great Lakes copper disappeared. And I'm here to figure out where it went, who took it, and why. So, George, you're probably wondering why I asked you to take me out to Isle Royale.
Yeah, what's up?
Obviously, you know, Isle Royale was a place I know they did a lot of mining.
Okay, first little nitpick here. There is no such thing as a forensic geologist. That is a title that he made up to make himself sound more, I don't know, credible or legitimate.
Whoever was here mining thousands of years ago took a lot of copper out of here.
What kind of quantities are we talking about?
Between a billion to a billion and a half pounds. A billion.
A billion.
To a billion and a half pounds of copper.
How long would that take? I mean, my God.
Well, one of the estimates from one of the engineers was 10,000 people for 1,000 years.
Okay, so first off, this is kind of foundational to this this conspiracy theory that there's a whole bunch of copper that was mined out and has disappeared, and this number is always just incalculably huge. He's using, you know, billions of tons. The original estimate that I saw from the 1960s that Roy Dreer, who kind of started all this, said 500 million pounds. So pounds, not tons. So this number is changing radically depending on who you ask, and the only people who ever bring up the quantity of copper that was mined out are people who are advancing this idea that of the transatlantic copper trade. Actual researchers do not come up with these estimates, and the people who do produce these estimates never show their math. They never tell you how they're calculating this. So as far as I have ever been able to tell, these numbers are completely made up. We also know that the old copper complex lasted a lot longer than 1,000 years. It lasted for no less than 3,000. And I believe his name is David Pompiani. His research is actually pushing copper working around Lake Superior back another 2,000-ish years. So we're really not talking, based on, you know, the calculations that they're giving, about that many people. And we're talking about a very long stretch of time, 5,000 to 6,000 years. So this is not a mystery.
That's mind-boggling. And I know that the Native Americans did use copper, but you know, they've never found anything even close to the type of numbers that you're talking about. So the question is, where did all that copper go? I think I know. I'm firmly convinced that it's connected to the...
Okay, so I've talked about this crock of shit before. Just to rehash it, in order to make the claim that there's missing copper, you have to know three things. You need to know how much copper was mined in the first place, which again, we don't. You need to know how much copper in the form of artifacts has been recovered from the ground since then. And we also don't know that because so much of what has been excavated by people with metal detectors, artifact hunting, not archaeologists, so that quantity has not been tabulated. And then the third thing you need to know to identify if there is missing copper is how much is still in the ground, which obviously there's no way to know. So this claim that there is missing copper is coming from a mathematical equation where none of the values are known at all. This is basic mathematical gibberish.
5,000 years ago, man learned to combine copper and tin together to forge an even stronger metal, bronze. It was a game.
Okay, quick point of order here. The first bronze was not a combination of copper and tin. It was an alloy of copper and arsenic, which is actually, it makes a lot more sense because arsenic is a geologically naturally associated with copper ore. So in the smelting process, it is likely for an incidental mixture of arsenic and copper to happen much more easily than with tin. And once you get the idea that you can mix these materials together, you can start mixing other materials together, and then you figure out, oh, copper and tin makes this material that is stronger and more durable and holds an edge better.
With more weapons came more advanced warfare. Nations became more powerful, rising up in an attempt to spread their culture around the world, all thanks to copper. But where did they get it? While sources for copper can be found throughout Europe, in places like the Swiss Alps, England, and Ireland, some people question whether there was enough mineral ore to account for the massive amounts needed to fuel the Bronze Age.
And those people are idiots.
And this tablet, found in Newberry, Michigan, could prove it. Check this out.
What's this?
It's a Newberry tablet. It's got 140 characters on it.
So the tablet's gone?
It's gone.
Oh, man.
It apparently was destroyed. You know, this is in beautiful condition, but how many great artifacts have we heard about? They're gone. This could be connected. I know that going back, copper was actually more valuable than gold.
Okay, here's another problem with Scott Wolter. This guy will use 19th century finds of any kind of inscription whatsoever as evidence to support his ideas. He most famously pushes the Kensington runestone in Minnesota as an authentic medieval Scandinavian inscription, which we know is not true. It is an obvious late 1800s, early 1900s forgery. The Old Norse specialist, Dr. Jackson Crawford, has done a pretty thorough explanation linguistically of how we know that the Kensington runestone is not actually from the 1300s. I will leave a link in the description to that video, but this is the kind of thing he does to muddy the waters, really. It's I'll get into this particular Newberry tablet later when he gets more in depth with it, but there's no reason to connect this tablet to certainly not anything in the Mediterranean specifically.
So that's a pretty strong motivator to come all this way.
It's the mystery around here. When you read the old papers from the early explorers that came, there's no remnants of who.
You know, one of the other things that's really important was the purity of this copper here. Copper, like most metals, has a unique fingerprint. I can test the purity of copper in the Great Lakes and compare the results to the purity of Bronze Age copper to see if it's a match.
No, you cannot. And this is really where I start to get pissed off. He's basically, what he's doing here is using the audience's lack of familiarity with material science and provenance research in order to make an argument that is actually not supported. Yeah, I'm going to have to break this down. So in most of the world, copper occurs in ore form. So this is a impure manifestation of copper that combines other elements like lead and sulfur. And in order to extract the copper from the ore, in order to purify it, you have to use a smelting process. And what that means is you're taking this ore that might only be, 5 to 10% copper, heating it up to a very high temperature, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and then that copper separates out from the impurities in kind of the same way as oil and water, because these trace elements and the copper have different specific gravities. So in a liquid form, they separate out. And this is how you go from a 10% copper ore to a 99.99% pure copper extraction. It's still how copper is extracted from copper ores today. So in the Great Lakes, you have an unusual situation where geologic processes extracted those impurities from copper deposits and created a nearly pure copper source up around Isle Royale and around the Great Lakes. You can do that artificially through the smelting process, and the results are going to be fundamentally the same. So this argument that if copper artifacts are made of 99 point whatever percent pure copper, and this naturally occurring copper is 99 point whatever percent pure, then they must be from the same source, is kind of like arguing that, oh, I have this like 14 karat gold ring and there's this 14 karat gold ingot over in Spain somewhere, therefore they must be from the same source. No, they mustn't be. You can make copper of this purity. This is ridiculous.
The big question is, where did the copper come from
and extremely dishonest.
You know, we're talking 5,000 years ago. This might be the only clue that ties it together. In the late 1800s, a thriving mining industry existed here, and hundreds of miners worked the pits. It was these miners who uncovered evidence someone else had already been here mining copper, possibly prehistoric people. And I want to discover who those people were.
Oh, well, Scott, this is what I've been talking about. This is the Minoan mine.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Isn't it something?
What's that, 50 feet?
I don't know, man. It's certainly a lot deeper than the other shaft that we saw.
Does that go underneath there? It looks like it keeps going.
It does actually. Not only can we see the shaft from the top, but we're gonna go down over here and you can see the shaft from the side as well.
Yeah, go on Google and look up the Minoan copper mine. This thing was a 19th century industrial copper mine that probably was on top of some other indigenous mining, but this mine shaft is in no way representative of what the indigenous people were doing here. Why are we even here? Next.
So, Judy, I just came back from the Minoan mine. My friend George took me there, and we saw some mining pits, and we talked about some of the quantities, the estimates of over 1 billion pounds of copper that was mined. So what do you think about the idea of ancient people coming from across the Atlantic and mining copper in this region?
It's the only thing that makes sense. Where did they get all the copper needed to build the Bronze Age, when bronze is made from most...
This is such an ignorant statement. There are copper mines all over Europe and the Near East that were actively mined during the Bronze Age. And the fact that she thinks that this is the only explanation automatically outs her as a non-expert in this. Like, also, this, what's her name? Judy, she's not even a real copper researcher. She is a paper doll enthusiast who also ran a bunch of, essentially field trips to copper-related historic sites around the Great Lakes. And the fact that she also wrote an article, a popular news article about this particular piece of copper 10, 15 years ago. And the fact that this is the closest thing to an expert that this dumpster fire of a TV program is able to conjure up in order to support his ideas is goddamn pathetic.
Copper. Why wouldn't they come?
I agree with you. Why wouldn't they have? So they have every reason to do it. What about native legends? Do you know anything about that?
Well, yes, there are some stories about fair-haired, fair-skinned people having been here, and perhaps Native Americans even left a message about...
Okay, this is something else that really gets under my skin. When you're incorporating traditional knowledge into your argument, you have to cite your sources, just like anything else. So that's not just, oh, Native Americans say this, and lumping them all together and then not saying who actually is claiming this. It's saying, okay, this individual who was an elder with this ethnic group, the Ojibwe or what have you, at this time, in this year or on this day or whatever, and this is what they said. Not, oh, Native Americans have these stories about blonde-haired people that, it's especially insulting when there are actual legitimate transmissions of traditional knowledge that specifically mention from the Ojibwe the use of copper. This is a part of their material cultural tradition. And that is verified, but I have never seen any of these claims of, Native Americans talk about blonde-haired, light-skinned people. I've never seen those validated in a authentic context. So this is just something that, if people repeat it enough, they assume the audience is going to start believing it. But there is no source. There's never a source. I mean, if you've got a good one, drop it in the comments, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to figure out how and why it was either a misappropriation by later Christian missionaries or something along those lines, or a full-blown dishonest interpretation of something more legitimate. Moving on.
Are you talking about the petroglyphs in Copper Harbor, the ship petroglyph?
That's the one.
I've looked at that petroglyph, in fact, and I've done some research on it. Personally, I think it's probably maybe 1,000 years or somewhere in there, but it could be much older. I'm not sure. What do you think?
At this point, I don't have any evidence to support the idea that Scott Wolter likes the smell of his own farts, but I can't prove that he doesn't. So his forensic analysis is, I looked at it and it looked old. Don't be ridiculous. There's no way to directly date petroglyphs like this, and the thing is not terribly eroded. There's no real reason to believe that this petroglyph is older than 500 years ago, after Europeans had already made it to North America. In fact, the likelihood is that this is later graffiti. Without the addition of associated radiocarbon dates or anything like that, this is non-evidence. It doesn't prove anything. I could go scratch a ship in some soft rock using metal tools, which incidentally, this looks more like metal than stone tools, like modern steel chisels or whatever, than anything I've seen done in more solidly verified contexts. This is another. The evidence does not support the argument. It's insufficient, woefully insufficient. It looks so recent. And if you're going to try to claim that it's older, then you've got to have you've got to have the guns to go there, and he does not.
That ship, I think, is so significant. It's so different from anything Native Americans would have done. The shape of the sail, it's quite square.
I looked at that very carefully a couple of years ago, and it has sort of a Minoan style square sail.
Oh, cool. It's a square sail. Everyone, also on the internet, everyone loves to claim this. People who think that the Vikings made it to Lake Superior say, oh, it's a Viking sail, or, the Minoans. None of this is culturally associated or verified. There's no evidence that this is actually anything of any antiquity. Even Wolters thinks that it's around 1,000 years old, and he doesn't even have any evidence to support that.
The Minoans were a Bronze Age culture from the Greek island of Crete. It was not until around 1900 that archaeologists discovered evidence for the Minoans, but little is known about them. What is known is that the Minoans had a huge sailing and trading empire that dated back to about 3,500 to 5,000 years ago. That's precisely the time that copper in America was disappearing.
It is not precisely the time that copper in America was disappearing, because copper was being mined 1,000 years before that, minimum. Like I said, Pompiani's research indicates that it was being mined closer to 7,000, 8,000 years ago, if not earlier. So again, these timelines don't match up. Next.
If I can test Michigan copper and match its purity with that of ancient Bronze Age copper, then I might be able to prove the Minoans were America's mystery miners.
Again, just because you say that this test proves that conclusion doesn't make you right, and this test will not prove that conclusion.
Welcome to Fort Dubon. I'm Connie.
Hi, Connie. Scott Wolter.
Scott, glad to meet you.
Say, I'm a forensic geologist, and I was referred to you by a man.
Which again,
who
forensic geology is made
mentioned
up.
to
It is
me
not a
that
thing.
You had an artifact here that might be helpful in some research that I'm doing about the ancient copper culture. Have you ever heard of the Newberry tablet?
Yes, we have them right here.
You have it?
We have them.
You do have it?
We have them in this museum, yes.
How did the artifacts get here?
Dr. Benson, in the 60s, was a collector of many artifacts, and he received a phone call from Fort Algonquin in the area, and he decided, why not? So he looked at the Newberry tablets, he purchased them, he brought them here, and the Smithsonian analyzed them. But at that time, they had no clue, so they put them in the fraud, in the hoax.
In the fraud category?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I don't know if they're a hoax or a real thing.
Let me ask you a question. Has anybody looked at them in modern times scientifically?
No.
That you're aware?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
I think I can help you with that.
Okay, this is actually something he's doing here is actually interesting. This is actually something we do with petroglyph and other kind of inscriptions, is using oblique lighting. So if you're trying to light something that has been carved out from the top or head on, it kind of washes out and it's hard to see. But if you use a mobile light, like a flashlight, and shine the light at an oblique angle instead of directly on, it creates shadows that make the incisions or the part that got carved out easier to see. He's already got a scan of what's on there, so this isn't really necessary. It's mostly just for show.
Well, I think I'm done with the preliminary examination, and I have some good news and some bad news. But I'll start with the bad news, okay? This is nothing I'm sure is going to shock you, but the tablet's in really tough shape. And it needs some attention, serious attention. Otherwise, just another handling could be gone. The good news is I was able to make out some of the characters on the tablet. I know there's at least 3, possibly 4, maybe even a 5th character that's still there. And I think it looks like what we have here on this photograph taken in the late 1890s of the tablet. I know for sure we have this trident figure here. It's definitely there. And it's Minoan script.
A weird thing. I heard of...
Okay, so there are 2 kinds of Minoan script. They are called Linear A and Linear B. Linear B is a very archaic form of the Greek language, Linear B. Linear A, we don't have cracked. In fact, we probably never will, because it is believed to be the language of whoever was living on Crete prior to the arrival of the Minoan Greeks. And you can look up the both of these scripts. They are on Google. There are Wikipedia pages for them. There are a couple of symbols that are represented in that photograph that do appear in Minoan Greek, I believe Linear B specifically. But the one that, the kind of pitchforky looking one, also appears in the Younger Futhark from Scandinavia. This is a symbol that occurs commonly in a lot of different early scripts. So the 1 or 2 that he picks out as being similar to Minoan are not universals, but they're incredibly common in Old World scripts, especially very early ones. So if you look at a bunch of the others and compare them to other Linear A and Linear B characters, they don't match. So whatever it is, it's not Minoan, and dollars to donuts, it's a forgery. I mean, Also, no one really is talking about how this might be an early manifestation of something like the Cherokee syllabary was in the southeast, where maybe somebody in the Ojibwe region had seen Europeans writing and had developed something of their own in response to it. Or maybe before contact they had developed their own writing system and it was never really widely adopted, something along those lines. You never really hear that argument made. It's always, no, it came over from Europe because like Europeans have all the book smart stuff and all of these Native Americans like aren't smart enough to do that themselves or whatever. It's just really kind of revealing that no one ever considers that this might actually be indigenous in origin. And, Milo over at Mini Minute Man has made a similar point, I believe, before on some other hoax stones found in North America. But anyway, moving on.
Not much left.
Yeah, they've all been tampered with. Let's get out of this cold water. I'll tell you about it on the phone.
I appreciate guys like you that are out there looking for these things. You were absolutely right. That one structure underneath there did look like a W. It was a little flat on the bottom, didn't loop up in the middle like most W's do, but it definitely was nicely symmetric, and it was a beautiful symbol down there. There's no question about that.
The symbols do match.
But I have to tell you that I'm a little skeptical about what I saw in the water. The rocks there looked to me like they had not been there for a long time, and I would have expected more sediment buildup.
The mounds were not like I found them several years ago.
I don't know what the situation is there. It doesn't mean that, some of them aren't legit or there are others in other places.
It's not so
It's
much
the most intellectually honest thing he said in this entire series, or this entire episode.
And we're still doing a lot of investigation, but
And a simple test could help me prove it.
No, it cannot.
If Michigan copper is as pure as copper from Bronze Age Europe, and specifically as pure as the ingots from one of the only Minoan shipwrecks ever found, then there's an ancient connection I think is impossible to deny. Hey, Greg. I was up in the UP, Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and I have a sample of copper right here. I understand it's very pure.
And so what we've got is a accelerator that's going to generate a high energy beam of particles. Those are going to shoot down through that tube, and as those ions hit it, the sample will emit X-rays. And those X-rays can tell you things about what's inside. So firstly, if we look at the larger spectrum, we see these peaks that clearly are due to copper. So there's lots of it.
Big peak there.
Yep. And then if we look at the finer results, the trace elements, we see a bit of germanium, arsenic, and some even more exotic things like rubium, terbium, and thallium.
Okay. So that's a pretty unique fingerprint. I mean, these things are represented here. They're just so much smaller than the copper.
Yes, they are.
Okay. What was the percentage of copper? Were you able to determine that?
Well, at least of the metallic elements present in the sample, something from 99 to 99.9% is copper.
99+% copper. Well, that confirms what we were told. What we suspected is that copper was extremely pure.
And see, this is why Scott Wolter is a con artist. He used, it's a critical thinking 101. Does your evidence support your claim? He has built up over the course of this entire episode that if these two samples have a similar purity rating, if they are similarly pure in copper, then they must be from the same source, which, as I've already explained, is not the case. You can make 99.99% pure copper from 10% pure copper ore given enough heat and refining through the smelting process. The whole thing is a colossal lie sold to, a TV watching public that is largely not specifically educated in these kinds of provenance research techniques. If you want to know where the copper coming in the Mediterranean was coming from shipwrecks like the Uluburun and other areas, you have to use lead isotope fingerprinting, because lead isotopes are produced at the same time as the copper ore sources are. And then those lead isotopes are not all radioactively stable. Some of them start to break down. So the older the copper source is geologically, the more that lead isotope composition, the more it changes over time, which means that different sources are going to, of different ages, are going to have different lead isotope ratios to them. And there are 3 different ones, 3 different lead isotopes. So if you actually want to know where these are from, you have to do lead isotope fingerprinting analysis. And when we do that, we find that these Mediterranean sources are largely coming from the island of Cyprus, which gets its name from, I believe it is ancient Greek word for copper. The island is literally named after copper and was mined heavily during the Bronze Age. This idea that all of these copper artifacts trace their sources back to the Great Lakes in America is completely unsupported by the material science. So that's really all I've got for this episode. I'm sure that I will get a very colorful series of objections and concerns and comments, and perhaps a, barely legible dissertation in my comments section after this. But I have had it with this kind of extremely dishonest, manipulative television program being used to sell conspiracy theories to a public who doesn't have the specific technical knowledge to be able to see through the lies. So I look forward to reading your comments. As always, thank you for watching. Out.